Like, what does on-chain reputation mean to you?
Great question. So to me, there's sort of there's the unprocessed reputation and there's the processed reputation, right? What's particularly powerful about the way blockchains work in terms of establishing a reputation and an identity for a person is that the history of all the transactions, even sort of microtransactions like interactions with with an application or votes in some sort of on-chain governance process, all of these things are stored, right? They become part of the the underlying data. And this doesn't just have to be the categories of data we're collecting now, but you can imagine all sorts of contexts where things that are currently in Web 2 digital exhaust. You create a PowerPoint at your summer internship, and that PowerPoint goes around the office and maybe the CEO opens it 20 times. That's actually kind of interesting and useful value, right? That your PowerPoint that you made at your internship is being used sort of continually by the firm even after you leave. But like that data doesn't live anywhere because nothing's collecting it, nothing's tracking it, much less like somehow propagating it and linking it back to you. If the PowerPoint sort of had a digital asset echo that lived in your crypto wallet, right? That you had interacted with whatever system it was generated in, and this asset as it moved around the firm, was sort of propagating back some high level summary statistic of how valuable it was, right? Like, so, you can imagine an implementation, like you have an NFT of like a little, folder icon or something that gradually turns gold from being like, sort of some other color. By the way, I'm not at all good at like coming up with good design ideas off the top of my head. I am certain that is skeuomorphic and really ugly, but it is maybe what like, an office application would come up with. So,
yeah, I think all the designers listening to this right now just force quit the application and to stop listening to the podcast at that idea.
Yes, designers, please stay with us. Don't fault me for my really bad design sensibilities. But I spent a lot of time using Office products. But what was I going to say? No, you know what it should be? It should be like a little paperclip with like googly eyes that like, gradually turns gold or something like that. That would be like a great throwback.
Yep.
Digital exhaust. Oh yeah, right. So you have this digital exhaust, right? You have this echo of the value you've created at the firm that now lives in your chain, on-chain history. And all of these different things together, right? Whether it's that you were in some NFT project or DAO before it got big, or that you like created this PowerPoint that's somehow generating a lot of value at the firm, even long after you left. Like these things sort of live in the history of your transactions and online engagements. And that contains a lot of really valuable information about you, right? Like, you can claim you were in a club before it got cool. You can claim that and verify it to more to the point. You can verify that you contributed to some large scale open source project, and you can verify that this thing you created at your firm is remains very valuable to the firm to this day. And so that's sort of the unprocessed, right? There's just this massive history, like sort of jumble of data, digital exhaust of all forms, buying and selling NFTs, contributing to DAOs, making PowerPoints, maybe receiving a degree somewhere along the way. I think there will be sort of processed frames for that, both like algorithmic aggregators that sort of make sense of the information, and also, sort of showcases where you yourself sort of like create like a digital resume and sort of explain some of the information yourself or lay it out how you would like. But it's a combination of that tracking and permanence and immutability, right? The sort of the fact that all the information is there and accessible both to these types of applications that might aggregate it to third parties who might want to like, hire you or create, sort of a bio about you for a talk or something. And also to you to be able to showcase in a way that's completely verifiable.
Yeah. I was listening to this podcast recently, and the hosts were talking about this guy who he tracked like every data point he could about himself for like 8 years, and you could go through this website he made, and it was like on every single day tracked, I think it was like 800 different data points, everything from body temperature, sleep, mood, how much time spent on the internet, like did I talk to a friend today, like all that kind of stuff. And then at the end of it, end of the study said, on the website, after doing all this research, I've concluded that tracking all this information yielded no benefit to me. While it was interesting though. And you talk about, I think something I'm trying to figure out is what pieces of our digital exhaust or our online identity do we want to be tracking around reputation and associated with ourselves? Is every single document we create and share actually worthy? Or am I hearing from you that there are going to be aggregators who track the granular data points, like the transaction histories and the things you create, how many times they're viewed? Like there's going to be area and innovation around that, but then there's also going to be innovation around the data points that you choose to display associated with your identity. Like, will there be those two worlds, or do we really need all that digital information tracked?
Yeah, well, and do you track everything? What do you track? That's also a very hard question, right? There will be, because clearly we don't want to store everything on chain, and nor can we at current levels of the architecture, right? Like, could you imagine, if every single if every single key press or something on your computer like also created some sort of on-chain transaction, the gas wars of yesteryear would be nothing in comparison to the sort of absurd levels of transaction processing necessary. So definitely there's a deep question about like what types of information is useful. And how do you record that in ways that are robust and meaningful, but also not gigantic, right? Like you're not going to store, you're hopefully not going to store the entire PowerPoint, for example, at least, again, with sort of current architecture. There are these two curation questions, right? There will be sort of like, algorithmic curation applications that sort of like organize the information by looking at all of it and sort of using algorithms to process and simplify it and sort of pick out useful bits. And then there'll be sort of personal curation. There's also sort of the underlying question of like, who has access to what, right? In a world where, and again, in a world where things are immutable, especially, you have to be very careful about which types of things you store and like how much, sort of like the opposite of the ability, sort of a lot of the movements around being able to forget stuff from your digital history. It's already, we already have on the internet lots of, instances where there's actually more information that people would like to be able to remove. And so figuring out how we like what a proper process for, curating who has access to what types of information, what, if anything, sort of does really become completely immutable and permanent. Like these are all questions I think innovation is also going to have to address.
Yeah. At Unstoppable, we rolled out, we talked about this on our Twitter space, we rolled out badges. And I think that was an interesting example of curation because we looked at certain smart contracts and looked to see if people had engaged with them, right? Their transaction, you can see someone's wallet that they've associated with their domain, that you can then look at that wallet and see what its transaction history has been. And so for certain transactions like minting a certain NFT, holding an NFT, we're able to self-create badges. And that these badges, members can go in and select if they want to display these on their profile or hide them. And so it's a very, I'd say, first iteration attempt at some of this like self-curation of reputation, and then allowing people to choose what they hide and don't hide. Their transaction history is out there. At the same time, the average person has no ability to actually sift through that transaction history and make sense of that data. So I think it'll be interesting to see how other people then tap in and choose to create badges, eventually open source this functionality, allow third parties to create badges. Then as a user, I can choose what I want to display or keep hidden. But it definitely allows other people to start creating different identity points.
Very much. I mean, and let me just, shout out quickly. I said this on the Twitter space as well. I think the, sort of the toggle on, toggle off, sort of display system that you guys are working with is very much like one paradigm that works here, right? That like, just like somebody could read through like every post one ever made on Facebook or something like that, you can choose ones to curate and sort of like elevate or pin or whatever the case. I actually don't remember whether Facebook specifically has pinning. We can call it, Slack definitely does. So does Discord. The Facebook definitely has some way of like choosing photos as your sort of main view for photos. I just don't remember what the name of the action is. And so giving people the ability to work with the overlay in sort of like a Web 2.5-ish environment, right? Like, Web 3 is the back end. It carries all the information, and then you interact with a client-side platform to decide what's displayed, and then you can point people to that page. I think is a really powerful framework.
You're listening to the Unstoppable Podcast, the go-to place for everyone to learn about the latest innovations in Web 3, NFTs, and the decentralized web. Welcome to the metaverse.